Good evening, everyone. Sorry for the short delay. Welcome to Tutor's webinar. Tonight, we have an opportunity to dive into the world of startups and demystify the creation of minimum viable products. Our honorable speaker is Mr. Ned Lomigora, a board member of MIT Enterprise Forum of NYC, a former Olympics athlete, and a serial entrepreneur who discovered his passion for startups during his years at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. His work there led to creation of MIT Auto ID Center that produced technology standards later adopted by electronic product code organizations as a world standard. He co-founded his first startup in computational biotech space and further took on the co-founder and CEO role of a startup in a publishing space. Both ventures ended with a successful exit, and Ned was asked to run a high-end biotech equipment company. The journey has taken him back to his software roots, and he founded his current company, Cape Antech, which provides exceptional quality custom software solutions. The clients include Fortune 500 companies, but also many successful startups. To all our viewers, thank you for joining us tonight. Feel free to ask questions in the QA section or the chat, and they will be answered by our speaker throughout the presentation. Ned, thank you so much for being here.
Anna, for having me, and thanks everybody for attending. I will quickly go into slides. I will just say a little bit about seminar today. I'm really honored. Oops, the wrong one. I'm really honored that I was asked to do this seminar today, and this is something that I've been working on for my entire career, building products, especially in software industry. So today's session is going to be mostly for people that are working in software industry. However, a lot of these lessons that I will talk about today are applicable to other industries. Like Anna said, I am a serial entrepreneur. That means I have more than one company that I built and sold. So I could tell you a little bit about process of doing that. And through that process, I had to learn, sometimes hard way, how to build a good product. And this presentation is a mix of my own experience and also some of the best practices out there that I later learned as I was building some of my products and some of my companies. So today, what I like to do, instead of me just kind of having this platform and talking to you, I'd like to get a lot of feedback, also a lot of questions. So as I speak, we encourage people to send questions in, and you can interact with your questions, and Anna will actually ask me those questions during my presentation. So I'm happy to stop the presentation, answer the question as I go along. So I think the best way to learn something is if something is not clear to you, something that I'm talking about, please ask a question, and I will answer it during my presentation. And that way we'll make it as interactive as possible. So first question that you always ask yourself when you're trying to build a product is, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Today we're focusing on specific product or a solution called minimum viable product. And it's very specific because it's not a full product. It's something that you have to develop before you actually know whether you even have a business or a company. So knowing how to build an MVP is actually going to determine whether you're going to be successful in your startup and whether you're going to be successful in building a product later on. So it's really important to get this concept down and understand it. But the first thing about this concept, minimum viable product, is to define what the problem is, right? What problem you're trying to solve. And you'll be surprised how many times people go into this not thinking about what problem they're trying to solve. It's very hard to be very clear on something like this. It's not easy, even though you might think there's a problem. We often tend to solve wrong problem. It's just a human bias, the way we are wired. So it does take a lot of reflection. One thing that helps in this process is knowing that you've done it, so that you experience problem yourself. So that's not necessary condition for you to be successful in building an MVP, but it's really important. So if you came from an industry where you worked in a company that had this problem, or you observed this problem working with a customer through your work, and you saw it with more than one customer, and this is a repeatable problem, something that you had to deal with in your everyday work, that is a huge asset, and that is something you should leverage, because your frustration and your pain and your customer's pain is also something that will guide you in how to define the problem. One of the things that I learned at MIT is, and MIT is famous for this, MIT is best in the world for teaching you how to define a problem. Because defining a problem is, as one of my professors have told me, is 50% of a solution. So half a solution is knowing how to actually set the problem correctly. And then solution flows out of it. Now, when you define a problem, the key here is not to really look for a problem that everyone wants solution to. Because to build an MVP, you have to really narrow everything. You have to narrow your focus in terms of customer, in terms of solution, even in terms of the problem within the problem. We have to find several of those instances of the problem, or maybe variations on that problem, that are the most critical. And I'll talk about that later. But you have to identify a group, a very narrow group of clients with this problem. And it might be obvious to say this, because having a narrow group will help you test it better and easier. But if you don't, it's going to be pretty hard to address a problem for a much bigger audience. So that's the step number one. And then you have to talk about who is your customer in general. Now, it's easier said than done. So let's talk about that a little bit more. Who is your customer, and how do you define it? I said before, you have to understand who you're solving problem for. And again, in the beginning, you may have a larger population of customer that you want to solve it for, but to build an MVP, you have to really narrow it down. We're really talking about maybe a few dozen people that you want to target first, maybe a few hundred people, but very small number of customers. So we're not talking about tens of thousands of people. We're not talking about solving a problem at scale. We're talking about somebody who's actually going to be interested enough to try your solution, because you know that your solution will not be perfect, will lack a lot of things. This minimum viable product is going to lack a lot of things, and it's going to be very kind of like a solution that you will use once, learn from it, and move on. The way to determine the right customer, the right initial group of customers, is to ask two questions. One is, what is the frequency or occurrence that this problem, these customers have this problem, right? How often do they experience the problem? If they experience the problem once in a while, it's not going to be very helpful. So for example, if I'm looking to buy a house, I go to a real estate site, I buy a house every, 5, 10, 15 years. So I'm not the right customer if you want to build a website to sell houses. Same with cars. I'm going to buy a car every 5 to 7 years. I'm not your customer, right? The right customer is the dealer or the realtor, real estate agent or real estate agency that is actually selling this, because they will go on that website, list new houses, new cars every day. So in terms of dealer, they have to meet quota every month. Real estate agents, same thing. So they will be the real customer who will want to use the site every day. And they have a real pain that is very frequent, right? Actual people buying houses, buying cars are not your customer, because they're going to experience this pain every 5 to 10 or longer years, right? The other question is, how acute is this problem? Meaning, are they going to, for example, are they going to go out of business, or their life is going to be really crappy if this problem persists, right? So you have to ask, how difficult is this problem for them? what they would want to pay for that problem to go away. Right? So that's a really important part. That also, we think that just because we have something that is convenient, it doesn't mean that you should build a solution to make it more convenient. It's kind of things where, if I don't have that solution in a week or two or a month, my world's completely going to change. So that's the kind of question you need to ask, and that's the kind of problem you need to be solving. There are a lot of apps out there. If you go on your phone right now, you probably have apps that you haven't opened in a very long time, right? Those are all the apps with the problems that you had that you thought you're going to need, but you didn't really use much. Our phones are full of those apps. We only use maybe 10-20% of those on daily basis, weekly basis. The rest of them are somewhere tucked away on a 5th, 6th, 7th screen or in a cluster of apps that we never use, right? Those are the kind of problems that people thought would be interesting to solve, but turns out that they didn't really have to be solved, that they were not so acute. In terms of price, you always have to think about another way to think about problem is whether another way to think about solution to a problem is whether your solution is good and whether the problem you're attacking is the right problem, is to think whether someone will pay for it and whether someone will pay a slightly unreasonable price for it. Just a second. Am I still online? Just a quick check. I got a message here. Just want to verify.
Yeah, everything's fine. Since we're just starting out with the MVP, we have one question that you could help clarify. How to even verify a good product idea before investing a lot of time into making the product?
Yeah. So how to identify good product idea? Well, that goes back to some of the things I said before. So the whole point of this is to really not build the product before you identify, first of all, the problem you're solving, right? So first question, ask yourself a question, do you think you have a good problem to solve? That would really lead into, other questions like, can you define your customer with that has this problem frequently and has this problem that's really bothering them, right? So that is the way. So it's a very generic question. How do you know the product is good? But the best way to do it is to solve a problem on a small scale or build a product on a smaller scale. So you fail fast and fail in a small way before you actually continue to build a product, which is really the whole point of doing this minimum viable product approach. Because you can't know. There is no clear way to know before you start building a product whether a product's going to succeed or not. There's no way. Amazon failed dozens of products. Apple fails dozens of products on a monthly basis. Facebook tries different products or different features on a daily basis. So, and most of them fail. Most of them have failed. Most of them have investments of billions of dollars and they all fail. So, but some of those that succeed, they succeed because the process they go through is to iterate, to test whether the customers that they think will use them. And over time, they improve on those. So there's really no way even the biggest, smartest and best funded companies to know whether product's going to, but at least this is giving you a method. Using MVP is giving you a method to get to that point with the minimum cost, minimum time, and the fastest way to iterate. So that is my answer to that. So I was talking about starting price high or low. So my point here is my recommendation is to price your product a little bit higher than you would typically think you should price it, because if someone's really desperate to use your product, they will actually pay the price. And that way you will weed out people that kind of want to use a product, they don't really need it, versus people that really need a product. And you also are getting a test point there, whether somebody needs this solution so badly that they will be willing to pay some price that's actually not even reasonable. That's how difficult problem it is for them. So that's a good test point. And at the end, how easy is for your business to find? So let's just say this is kind of assuming you built a product, you built an MVP, and you want to test it, and you want to give it to people to use, how easy it is to find it. If you can't find a way, good channel to advertise your product and to get other people to find your product easily, it's going to be very difficult to even test it, to test this initial version. So before you go into this process of building an MVP, this question has to be answered before. It might be as simple as sending emails to people, but then will you have the email list that you need? Will you be able to target the email list you need? These are kind of assumptions you can't make ahead of time without knowing for sure, because what good is the product if you can't put it in the hands of the people that need it? And this is a process. So after, so we covered, we covered your customer. We covered, how to go about defining your customer. And let's talk about the process.
Before you move on to the process, we had a very interesting question in regards to the customers. Ahmad is asking, do you always start with addressing the pains of your potential customers, or do you also focus on creating new gains?
Well, yeah, the former. So you always focus on the initial, the immediate pain that your customers. My understanding is question is, do you address the pain that you have, the customers have currently, or you focus on adding more feature or more value that you haven't yet identified? Always address immediate pains first, no matter how small. It's just a good practice, because even though you might not, see that as a more long-term effort, it's, you're building a product, you want to have good product, and you want to be known as somebody who has good product. So always solve those customer problems that are immediately in front of you. However, this is assuming you already have a product that's running. This is not assuming that you built an MVP and you put it out there and somebody's just kind of giving you feedback on what they think you should be building or how you should be building. That's not what I'm talking about, because I'll talk about that. As a matter of fact, you should never ask a customer what features they want you to build in the product. That's something that you never want to do. What you want to ask and what you want to find out from any of your potential customers is exactly what I said before. What is the problem that this is addressing, and whether it's solving their problem, right? So first you identify the problem, you assume that you know what the problem is. Then you put your MVP out there, and then customers are trying it, and then they will give you feedback whether it's solving their problem. It's up to you to figure how to solve the problem. It's up to them to tell you what the problem they have, right? They should not be telling you how to build your product. I hope that's an answer. What would help me is if when you ask questions, when the audience asks questions, if you have a context to it, an example, a specific detail, that would help, because different if question is general, I can apply then 10 different contexts to same question. Depending on the context, I will give a different answer. Just so you know, so if you give me a little more detail in terms of, specific examples, if you know about it, that would help me answer more precisely. The process to follow, MVP process to follow. This number one bullet, the top bullet, is really the most important thing. And just think of that. If you don't remember anything else from today's presentation, just remember this one, and don't forget this one. So one thing that I would like you to take away, just one thing, is launch as soon as possible. Now, I know that a lot of us are perfectionists, especially if you come from technical engineer background, and we don't like to put something out there that people will not like or will look crappy. That's exactly what you should be doing. You should really, just put your own ego aside and cut the crap and just put this product out there, whatever it is, because what you want to do is you want to save yourself time, especially if you have an investor, even more. You want to save the money and investment, and you want to get to the feedback from your potential customers as soon as possible. And the only way you're going to do that is by building something very, very quickly, putting it out there, getting that feedback and then using it to either iterate or decide whether you're going to give up and do something else. So that's the key. Now, launching as soon as possible has exceptions, and these exceptions are not related to the methodology of building an MVP. They're related to industry, and industry such as one that has a lot of regulation, like banking. You can't just put a product out there because it will break all kinds of privacy laws. Same with insurance. Also, if you're building something very complex, you can't build a rocket and put it out there and see what happens, because it's a, it's a basically bomb. So it's, in those cases, they're very rare cases, but in those cases, you can't just put something very quickly without passing through regulatory hurdles and also passing through some really stringent checks. But for everything else, we're talking about software development. For anything in software development that doesn't have to be regulated, heavily regulated, you can actually do. And you should be doing launching as possible, soon as possible. Signing up customers, who are your customers? How do you sign in? Well, start with people that you know, that you even, that people that you were inspired by, who wanted you to solve the problem in the first place. If you wanted to solve a problem for some merchants that you saw have a problem, talk to them and give them the solution and ask them to try it. If you know, so you have to know who your customers are. That's the whole point. You have to start with people that had this problem the first time. If you don't, then you have to ask yourself, what are you building, right? For whom you're building it for. And so this answer is kind of self-explanatory, and at the same time, there's a lot of times when you hear people are wondering, who are my customers? Well, in order to create a solution, you would know the problem, and in order to know the problem, you would have to know people with that problem in your midst, and also people that you can reach out easily. So we're talking about signing up a few dozen, maybe a dozen customers in the beginning. We're not talking about thousands of people, just a few dozen, just a small set. And then feedback is the only purpose of your MVP. And what I said is in the beginning, you just want to launch as soon as possible so that people can tell you whether they like it, whether it's solving their problem, and how effectively, right? That is the only reason. You will not use MVP. You will most likely change it completely between what it was in the beginning to what it was at the end. If you look at any product today, any product you use on a daily basis, you will realize, if you go back, if you take the time to go back and see what that product looked like 5 years ago, depending on what you're using. How did Facebook look like 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Twitter. I use Airbnb, when I vacation in different places. So I say, okay, how did Airbnb look like when it started maybe 10 years ago? Nothing like what it looks like today. All these popular websites or popular applications we use today didn't look anything like what they looked when they started. So that's basically what I'm trying to say. The MVP is never going to be your ultimate product. And then at the end, you have to iterate and continue to iterate on using that feedback. And when it comes to iteration, I want to make a distinction between iteration and pivot. So what does it mean to iterate, and what does it mean to pivot? When you iterate, you're just changing the solution, right? You're changing the solution, but you're sticking with the same problem that you started with, right? You're just modifying it to better solve that same problem. When you're pivoting, that means you're basically giving up either a customer or problem, or both, right? You're realizing your solution is not addressing the problem. You're looking at the wrong problem. You cannot solve it, and for whatever reason might be, you're changing it, and that's called pivot. And there are companies that pivoted, famously, and there's plenty of them, right? We hear this a lot, but a lot of times when you're doing MVP, you're not really, your point is to refine the MVP, find the solution, and if you realize you're not solving the right problem, or you pick the wrong problem to solve, you have to do something like pivot, right? Now, I just wanted to give you a pictorial explanation of what MVP is, because this is a famous slide by Henrik Kinberg that a lot of people refer to when they talk about how do you actually explain to someone what MVP is, right? So this top line, so if you look at the top of the slide where you see the wheel, the one wheel, the two, and then chassis, and then the full car. People imagine an MVP is something like this typically before they actually understand what it means. So they think, well, you give me a tire, and then you give me two, and then the next iteration you have a chassis, but it's convertible, with no roof. But then at the end I get the whole car with the roof and windows and everything. That's not what this is at all. The real MVP looks something like this. You start with a problem. What is the problem? Well, I need to get from point A to point B. Okay, well, let's try with the skateboard, right? Skateboard will get you there. It's right. You might want to build the car, but that's not what you're going to start building, because here's the reason why. In the top drawing, if you start with a tire and add to second tire and then the engine, and by the time you get to the car, you won't even sit in that car for who knows, months and years, right? Before you actually get something that you can test. The point here is you can't test it because user cannot use it. That's why you have frowny face, right, at the top. You cannot even use that solution until it's fully completed. That is the point. Now at the bottom, if you give someone a skateboard, they might be disappointed. They might be like, but it will solve the problem from getting from point A to point B. This next iteration will maybe give them a handle so that you can actually be more comfortable doing it. You know, it will be more stable, easier to use, right? But it's still not the car, right? But it still gives you something more. And you can test it. Again, you're testing and say, you know, it'd be even better if I have bigger wheels, and maybe if I can sit on it, right? Instead of standing and holding the handles. Then you get to the bike, because that's the next iteration in this logical progression. And then next thing is like, well, I don't want to pedal all the time. I have to go up the hill. Then you add an engine. That means you're getting to this conceptual motorcycle where you now have two tires, you have an engine. And then the last step of that process. So all along, you're testing it. You start with a skateboard, you're using it. You add a handle to the skateboard. You're still using it. And then you get to the bike, motorcycle, and eventually you get to the car. But the difference between the bottom drawing and the top drawing is the bottom drawing, you have used this product from the very beginning, from the first iteration, which is the skateboard, all the way to the car. You use the product, you got your customers to use it and give you feedback, and that enabled you to actually build this product all along. The top product, you started with a tire and you had customer wait until you built the car. And guess what? If they sit in the car and say, that's not what I wanted, you just wasted all this time and all this effort to build the car, right? Without any feedback in between the first tire and the completed car. So that's a huge difference. Do we have questions? I feel like I see some questions popping up.
There are three incredible ones. I was just waiting for you to complete this.
I would, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so first of the three is, what about measuring the impact and usage of the feature within the MVP? In my experience, analytics for events and various properties are what helps us decide whether to continue building feature or cut it from scope. What is your approach in validating the idea behind the MVP? Do you rely on metrics?
Yes, I will actually talk about metrics a little bit later. You have to have metrics that is built into the product that you're trying to develop. So if you're building a product, your metrics will literally have to be built in. So that's a great question. So yes, how do you actually know whether it's, well, how do you measure whether the feedback we talked about? How do you measure feedback? You measure feedback is in a software product by building a way into the product to track the metrics. So if your metric is how many times somebody use a certain feature, right? Meaning maybe that feature is clicking on it, and maybe there's a two-step process. You have to build into your product a way to track and store that information. So you have to build certain logs or other ways to do it, but you have to be built so that you can store that information. And you also have to pay attention to the way you're doing it, because and this goes down to a code level, like how they actually do it in a way that everybody else, not just few people in the company, can track that, so that they can see if you're labeling the data that you're tracking as people are using, say, your product, they're going to be, using the features, and every feature is going to have some sort of a log, right? You have to label the log and data that come out of it in a way that's very readable, and understandable to the rest of the people that may not be involved, because you want to get as many people as possible in your company or in your team to understand that the data you're trying to collect. So that's a great question, actually. I'll talk a little bit more about tracking, but that's a great question.
And the second one is, in a team of co-founders, how would you go about motivating others to pivot in the majority of, if the majority of the team members refuse to accept negative feedback and evidence to pivot? Would it be better to jump ship in that case and try again with a new team?
Oh, okay. So from what I'm getting, the question is asking is like, we're getting negative feedback, but I'm the only person on that team that is accepting the feedback and is willing to pivot into something different, where the rest of the founding team, I guess, is just sticking with the same solution, even though they're, in spite of this negative feedback. So if that's the question, right, that my answer would be to use data and to have people that are, that are accepting negative feedback and saying, yeah, we're just going to ignore it, to have an attempt of them using the data to show you why they believe that this is a good solution still, even though you have data that shows it's nothing. You try with data. I would always try with data. It seems like a situation, the way it's described, is probably not the best situation, just given that if you're starting something, you're already stubborn about initial feedback. It might not be a very good idea to continue if that feedback doesn't change, if that stance doesn't change, because you're going to have this happen every day for the rest of your like company's life. Because if people can't take feedback now, imagine how hard it's going to be to get feedback later when there's more investment in time. It's something called a sunk cost fallacy in engineering or projects. And people believe just because they put a lot of time and money that they should continue on the same path, which is really the opposite. What really should happen is that you have to give up, even though there's a lot of investment already made, if you see the solution is not leading you. If you see that your solution is not really helping you. So I would say I would give up personally, but not before I ask members or compare your data with theirs and try to reason through data first.
Thank you. And the third one is, what if it takes too long to develop an MVP? In a case where the MVP needs to go through long-term medical research, is that a good reason to pivot?
Yeah, so that goes back to regulation, which is medical research, which takes regulation, which, depending on what you're doing. I was in a company where our timeline was 5 to 6 years because we had to go through clinical trials, and that takes time. You can't just very quickly. This is in the US. So you have no option there. You build a product, you have a drug, and you have to go through clinical trials that takes years. So yes, in that sense, decide what you want to do. But this is one of those examples where I said that you can't just plow through very quickly. Their regulations are stopping you. It's not your product or your solution. It's really just a system that doesn't allow you to move forward fast. So the question is whether I should move on, pivot to something else. That's hard to answer. Something else meaning in the same area or completely different area. Depending on what you have option to use that whatever you built, which is very hard. You'll be using your solution to find a problem, which is very hard. Find a new problem that doesn't require as long as much time to implement, which I don't recommend doing. So in this particular case, you would have to find a different problem And if you don't want to wait, and if you're not ready to go through regulation or through long-term process, change the type of problem you're trying to solve. That's the only way, because this will, medical, biotech or any other field like that that has higher regulation. I've been through this myself. I mean, we had, we were very aware that no matter what we discover, had to go through a long process, years-long process. So you have to know that before you start, and you have to accept it. Otherwise, don't do it. Don't be in that field.
And the final one was, how can we properly test and learn from an MVP if the company still doesn't have enough traction?
Yeah, that's say it again. How can we do what?
How can we test and learn from the MVP if the company still doesn't have enough traction? So I'm assuming that if you have an MVP that you did not get enough feedback on.
Oh, well, that's okay. That goes back to the first problem. How come you don't have enough traction? Meaning, is it traction meaning you haven't gotten enough people to use it? Because that's the answer in itself. You either were not able to find a customer to use it, which is a problem in itself. If you go back to a few slides, let's see. Yeah. So can you, on this slide, who is your customer? So you go back to like, well, when you are starting to solve a problem, you will have to know some people that have this problem. And when you say traction, I'm imagining you mean, okay, we built something and we couldn't find a lot of people to test it, because traction to me means you found people to test it, they have tested it, they're giving you feedback, you might have built something or iterated on it, and now they continue to use because it's important for them to use it. If you didn't have traction because you couldn't find users, you have a problem of solving a problem that you don't know who the customers would be for. So that it goes back to the beginning, like, did you state your problem clearly? Do you know people that have this problem? You can't be working in isolation, building a solution to a problem that you don't know anyone who can benefit from that solution. So that's the first. If you put the solution out there and you say you don't have traction because you haven't found enough people, well, that's an answer to you maybe in a way that says you're not solving the problem. You're not really solving the problem, or you're targeting the wrong type of customer that doesn't have that problem, that your solution is not solving. So it's really hard without context. Like some of these questions are great questions, however, they're very general. So if you give me that's why I was asking if you can give me more specific, like context of the question, I may be able to help a little bit more with the more specific answer.
Well, that's it for the question, so we can keep with the presentation. But also, I have an option to give word to the attendees, so we can do that after these slides.
That would be great. Yeah. So yeah, because we meant for this to be very interactive. So I believe this is really important for everyone to take away. It's really nice kind of slide. So try to memorize this and try to understand that there's a huge difference between the top and the bottom. The main difference is the top, you don't get feedback until the whole product is done, which is bad. The bottom is you get something that doesn't look like a solution you wanted in the first place, like that's the skateboard. So that's not what you wanted, but it does solve your problem, enables you to go from skateboard to car by getting more feedback and getting more iterations done. Okay, that's the whole point. And also many people understand that minimum viable product is really just minimum crap you can release out there. And it doesn't mean that it's crap, right? It just means that something that you can test, right? So that skateboard was the earliest product you can test, right? Because you need that feedback. You can test it. Maybe bike is more the earliest usable product. Even though you can still use skateboard, many people can't. But let's just say most people can probably use bike. And then our earliest product that you start to really like is your bike. But these are the shades of the same. The point is to focus on building a skateboard before you build a whole car. And that's how you should think about your MVP. It's never going to look like the final product you wanted to, for millions of customers to use. So that's never going to look the same.
Okay, so I actually added this slide in to kind of steer Ned in a direction that's very important for Bosnia specifically. So what I noticed in my experience, especially working with software developers and people that are into engineering, the people that are very entrepreneurial, is that they get very excited about the idea. And then when you actually need to implement the idea, when you have all the things sorted out and you actually need to make the MVP, they lose motivation. They leave the project, they kind of abandon it. They believe they'll get back to it at some point or another, but basically the project ends up abandoned and never sees the light of day. So something very similar that's very present within our generation and like everyone in their 20s and early 30s is something called a career ADHD, which you might have noticed if you know those people that switch a company they're working for every year or so, up to 3 years maybe, since that there is really not a lot of time to even get into the workings of a company. And that is pretty similar to the way that projects are being abandoned. You lose interest after a short period of time, and then you kind of just leave it be and switch over to something else. And what I noticed is that people from Bosnia specifically have a huge issue of not accepting that not all of their progress will actually be tangible, will not show results immediately. So the overnight success is not actually done overnight. You actually need to do the hustling in the meantime. So my question to you, Ned, would be, since it's crucial to keep the motivation high, how do you actually keep yourself motivated when you get to that plateau of work where you're not sure if you even want to proceed with the project?
Yeah, thanks. Just that's my video. 1 second, I'm having an issue with the camera. Just 1 second. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm having an issue with my camera. Just 1 second. For some reason, I don't know what happened. Okay. Okay, there we go. 1 second. Let me just go back to the slides. Okay. So the question is, how do you deal with the plateau? And this is something that happens a lot, and happens in every startup I was involved with, on any product that I was involved with. You reach a point where you are saturated, whether that's because of frustration, long hours, or not getting progress that you want. And so, to use an analogy of like working out, going to the gym and making progress, because this is something that probably most of us do. We go to the gym, and for a few weeks or months, we see this great progress, and we can feel it. We get stronger, we get better at what we do, we lift more weights, we run faster, we stretch more. And at some point, everyone, and this is just biological, we hit the plateau because of the law of accommodation. Our body accommodates the resistance we put on it, and with the stress we put on it, and our bodies are very capable of accommodating. So then because of that, if we continue to do the same thing we were doing before, our bodies will not be pushed to grow because of that accommodation, law of accommodation. Similarly, when you are building a product and you reach a plateau, you're trying to build the product in the same way that you did before, going in the same direction. So you're going to face the same issue here. You're going to your brain, your capacity to do something different will stop to grow. And in this point, my suggestion and my experience is you have several options. One is stop doing what you're doing altogether, just move away to do something else, or maybe stop working on your startup or idea. and then give yourself some time to decompress. Because typically we don't do this. We typically plow through and put even more work, because we equate the amount of work we put in with the amount of progress, and that's not the case, right? We don't do that by putting more work. So actually, by stepping back, there's one way to actually reduce some of that fatigue, and maybe give yourself time to recuperate and break through plateau. The other way is what I've done this as well, is instead of working on a product in the same way you're doing it, start to build something different. Start to look into building a product, or taking a different approach to building a product. Similarly, in exercises, if you want to go through, break through plateau, instead of, say, doing push-ups every day, start doing some other exercises, maybe one-handed push-up, or maybe you're doing something that has nothing to do with push-ups, but it's building the strength and giving your body a different stimulus. The same way when you're doing, working on your product, do something that gives you a different idea, a different perspective. And because you will start to have more ideas by completely switching your mindset onto something else, and refocusing your attention to something else. So when I was building my product, in one of the companies I was building my product, we were catering to individuals. Product was in publishing space, and we were really working really hard, interviewing a lot of potential users we thought would be users, and that took a lot of time and effort. And every time we would interview people, we would get more feedback, and we would continue to build on it. And we thought we were making progress, but at some point I really burnt out, and I did not see a lot of progress, because you can go, you can get infinitely long number of suggestions, and there's only so much time that you can spend implementing them. So that actually contributed to me stepping back and looking at the problem differently. And instead of trying to solve the problem by looking at the user, I started to think differently, and I started to think about how would that problem be solved if we, instead of individual users, have a more like a power user who will then use the product to offer it to individual users. Meaning, in terms of software business, that's called you switching from B2C market to B2B market, right? You're building it to, you completely shifting the product architecture and the product purpose. But I wouldn't have done that if I didn't get to that plateau where I couldn't see progress. And the only way I could see progress is to really just move away in a different direction. So that's what I did, and that's how it worked for me. Again, there are many examples, but use the analogy of working out. Every time you hit the plateau, look what you've been doing and stop doing what you're doing and start doing it differently. Whether that be thinking a different way, or building a different set of features that you've been building before, refining a different features that you've been refining before, talking to different set of customers, something that's different, something that will shift your attention and focus away from what you've been doing for all along. That will give you a better perspective and will help you break through the plateau. At the end of the day, maybe you need to pivot. If you can't really solve the problem, that means if you go back to a few slides that I talked about, you have to probably think about whether this is somewhere here, whether this problem is something that you need to pivot or iterate, right? So that's maybe at that point, maybe you have to pivot instead of just iterate. I hope that answers the question.
Definitely does.
Okay, did you want to talk about some more? Did you want to continue talking, or are you done with this slide?
No, this was sufficient. I just wanted to throw it in there just to kind of get a perspective of someone that has not lived in Bosnia in a while.
Yeah, and if I may add, this is really important. Every bullet here is important because a lot of people, not just in Bosnia, but this is probably especially in Bosnia, and it's great that we're having this webinar where I kind of am used to being in an environment here in the US where, this is sort of science by now, how you build a product, and there's a lot of resources and a lot of people you can talk to and a lot of information you can find, but not so much in Bosnia. And it's like a second nature to think about MVP, when you're building MVP, what to do. In Bosnia, not so much. So I totally understand how, when you don't have immediate progress. And I've talked to some of the startups. I was a judge at competition at BH Futures Foundation competition. And I was one of the judges, and I talked to startups, during the competition and after the competition as well. And what struck me is that even though they had some good ideas, startups were kind of like at the precipice. They were like, okay, so if you don't get past this point, we're just going to, it looked like, they needed so much to get going, right? Where the way I see it is like, you don't want this one big push. You want you want baby steps, right? You don't want to wait for everything to happen at the same time for you to continue. You want to continue based on like maybe one piece of that puzzle solved, and then you continue to build your own puzzle. Might not look the best, might miss pieces, when the puzzle is over, but at least you continue to build something versus you kind of like, it's binary. It's like, yeah, you either succeed and get everything you need to move on, or you don't. It just never happens like that in reality. So I think that's something that is more of a mindset that needs to be learned. It doesn't come natural, but it has to be learned, especially with our entrepreneurs, because they do have great ideas. They do have a great attitude toward work, but I believe the failure, they take on failure or like lack of progress as a failure, which is not, which is just means like, you have to think differently. You have to kind of think around the problem. I always thought around the problem. When I was at MIT, I was working my thesis, and I had a very difficult problem to solve. I was given, and I think this is really good. Even though it wasn't a software startup, it was sort of a startup. I was given a problem. I had a robot I had to control at distance. My field was telerobotics. That required me to know how to control robots at distance, right, remotely. So currently, the state of the art in the industry was using cameras and using very complex algorithms. And, there's a whole field behind it that you need to master just to know how to do that. So you go in there and you had a robot. I built my own robot. There was a lab. So, I had this huge setup with a robot that was moving around, and, and I was in the other lab on a different floor of the AI lab at MIT, and I was controlling the robot, and I was using cameras, and it really sucked because, I had to figure, using different cameras, the distances between the robot and whatever I was trying to manipulate in the space. It was really hard because you had to calculate all those distances with 2D images. You have to superimpose one another. You have to calculate, triangulate the images based on camera distance. It was a nightmare. So it would take me like 2 PhDs to finish that. So instead of doing that, I had to work around the problem. I told myself, I'm not going to sit here for the next 5 years trying to figure this out. And I saw other people spending their lives, just on that problem. So I figured instead of, using cameras, I wanted to solve the problem, which is I want to manipulate space, right? Using a robot at distance. So I figured my space has to be live instead of robots being all seeing, all knowing, right? Omnipotent and omniscient, right? I want space to communicate with a robot versus robot to try to see everything. So I found a solution that was very unique and actually grew into a center at MIT. And that solution was to create sensory field of this space with very cheap technology tags called RFID tags to basically map the whole space. And then robot would be just instructed what to do. And it would be like, first of all, you diminish need of camera, right? Very small, you need very superficially, a robot doesn't have to be super intelligent and super capable. It has to just follow directions very well. And you have to have precise, mapping of the space using very cheap sensors, which you have in an abundance. So all of that was completely different way. Nobody was thinking of this before. So that's why they started a center, and now it's a standard RFID standard. But before it was just a problem that I had to solve, and I had to get around it, and completely changed how I approached it. And of course, within 6 months, I had a solution. So anyway, you can approach it that way. You have to step back and start thinking differently. And I really thought I could not solve this problem. I was desperate. I was really desperate. But that's when I got the idea to do what I did. So that's my little spiel. Okay. Do we have any more questions? I'm curious before we move to the next slide.
Not momentarily. So if they come up, I will let you know. And if you finish the presentation before they have questions, I would like to ask the attendees to just post a plus sign or anything in the chat, and then I'm going to allow you to talk in the chronological order.
Okay. Let's talk about solution. So, so you have to understand when you build something, whether the MVP does, whether what you build provides a solution. So first of all, you have to talk about customers a little bit, but the one way to think about customers is to find an easy target. So go back to the few slides when I talked about, you know, one way to find an easy target is to target those people that have a real huge issue with a specific problem you're trying to solve, that they would actually pay extra money to get it solved. People that have that problem happen often, not like once every few years. So you really want to find an easy target, right? And it sounds like sinister, but it's not. Like, you want to really find people that need this desperately. So that's desperation is a good motivator, you know, to use a solution. You know, if it's you know, a drug that somebody needs, it's a life-saving drug, you know, people will pay for it, right? I mean, that's a bad example, but because drugs take a long time to develop. But if it's something that's going to help you in your work, in any way that makes you excel at something and solves a problem, then it's obviously going to be helpful. If it's something that's going to help you look nice, or, you know, shave off few minutes or hours in a week of your time, it's probably not the most important thing people will use. That's going to end up being one of those long tail apps that you put on your phone and you have in the back you never use, right? Which is, if you go up to your phone, you're probably going to find half a dozen or a dozen of those. At least on my phone, that's the case. And then you also want to get rid of customers. When you start to develop your MVP, you're going to start to test your solution, and you're going to get customers to use your solution. That will not be the right customer for you. They will, you know, it's human nature. If you give them something that, and they know you need their feedback, you might be willing to give them something, and even give them a, you know, some people give discount, which I discourage. But let's just say you have given them solution to try, and now they're trying the solution and they're taking advantage of it. You have to be very cognizant of those people, because they're not there to help you with the feedback. They're just there to take advantage of it. So you have to get rid of them, meaning call the customer hurt. You have to get rid of customers that will not help you with the feedback. They will just take advantage of your solution and take a lot of time away from you. Serving them, helping them, getting their feedback, or you know, building things for that type of customer that ultimately will not end up using your solution and not needing your solution. And this last bullet is like, if I say don't discount, some people do. And the reason you don't want to discount is because I mentioned earlier, if you put a high price, it's much easier. You can always go down in price, much harder to go up in price, no matter what you do. And that's in everything, right? So once you set the price, you want to know if people will actually pay for it. So it's easier to actually see how good your solution is if your price is, like I said, a little bit unreasonable, than if it's really low, because people will pay for something that's really low, you know, in price, but you don't know if they really need it. They just maybe want to try it, and that is not the right metric for you to use. So my suggestion is, if you do not discount, there are some exceptions. Maybe if you're giving a deal, say maybe limited time deals, say you have to use this by certain time, I'll give you a discount if you use it by certain time. But and there are ways to do that, and that's another whole other presentation of how you can do that. But in general, discounting, especially in the beginning, is not a good idea. Measuring and improving. Again, this is another huge topic, and I'm sure a lot of you have probably used some of these techniques, but you have to be careful about what metrics you're going to use. We hear about metrics and page visits, right? I mean, we all know that. It used to be very interesting and important, and even now you can do that in every analytic tool. But for the most part, page visits do not really reflect well on whether your product is useful and whether it's solving the problem. So it's pretty useless, in my opinion, metrics. More important is if you have a specific metric that you built in when you're building your product that tracks specific workflow or path for user you predicted the user would take. So if you're solving a certain problem, you want user to use your solution in a certain way, you have to build logs in such a way to capture those interactions, right, from the beginning, so that you can store that and see historic view of how users and how many use it and in what context they use certain features. That is the only way to really be precise about tracking. And that's why I said here, stats that you have to track must be built into the product. And then events-based metrics, meaning what prompted them to do this particular action, right? It's two different contexts are totally, you're using a certain feature in two different contexts, give you totally different pieces of information, right? Why did this person click on this button at this particular context? So you can't just measure a number of times they clicked on certain things or use certain feature. You also have to capture the context, the other pieces of information in that same context. So that time frame or when they use it is super important to understand contextually why they did it, what was driving their decision. Especially in machine learning, if anybody's using machine learning, trying to optimize for like advertising or learning about the users, there's a huge now, difference between somebody building a model, machine learning model on their computer and testing it with, data that is nicely packaged and, you're a young user, you're one developer testing the solution versus production environment. You take the model, put it in production environment, it doesn't work at all. If Yahoo search, for example, or some other search algorithm is that you tag data and you put it on one site in one country, right? You want the different country like China who doesn't care about data tagging. You want same results from them, and you want same results from some European country. You will get two totally different search results or different results based on your targeted algorithm, because one country doesn't care about metadata and doesn't do anything about tagging it, where other country does. So your algorithm is going to work and be completely have the different effectiveness in one country versus another. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work well in China. It just means that China doesn't pay attention to data tagging as much as Belgium or Germany or US. So you have to pay attention to things like that. So it has to be context in which you are actually doing things. Enough of that. So at the end, I believe this is the last slide. In general, product development and MVP is part of product development. So very important things here, and I don't have to go through all of these, but I'd like the last bullet to be something I start with, which is to write a product spec, because everything else is really kind of, we've been through, but some of those things are kind of common. What's not common is for people to write things down, especially if you're an engineer. If you don't write things down, there's a lot of problems that can happen. And I know this is very simple. It's kind of common sense. You write the spec down. Most people don't write spec down, because when people talk about product features, they don't bother even, especially for something small, to document it. And the reason you want to document it, really write it down, store it, is so you can go back and when you're building your MVP, if you want to change something, you can go back and see what you decided to build, and you can at least have a way to track what you started with and what you're adding or what you're changing. And if you're, instead of a few weeks, taking a few months to build something, at least you can see that this is because you kept changing your spec all the time. But you can't do that unless you've written it down. You can't do it because if you don't write it down, every time you talk about something, someone's going to have a new idea. You're going to go back and revisit the product. You're going to build something new in the product. And like I said, few weeks will turn into few months. And that's a problem. You won't know why at the end of the 3-4 months process, you won't know why it took so long. But if you actually write a spec and see that you all along changed spec from the beginning to the end, like 5 times, that's where the time went in. The other is how do you actually agree when you have multiple people rating ideas? This is also something that people don't necessarily do. They don't pay attention to rating ideas. You have to know which one's difficult and easy, and the only way to really know that is if you know how to program. So if you're a developer, if you're an engineer, that's the knowledge you have, that's the advantage you have, because you know how long it takes to build something from the idea to actually implement it. But at the same time, if you're on a business side of things, you will probably know better, the impact that has. So you have to combine with both, right? You have to have some sort of a matrix in general sense. What's easy to build towards what's hard to build, and what is the impact, and then find a common ground. Obviously the highest impact with the lowest time to implement. If you can start with that, that's kind of like a general direction. So I think that's for now. I don't have to go through the rest of the bullets, but I think it's informative. Wanted to see if there's any more questions in the meantime that we accumulated.
There hasn't, though. I would like you to kind of give a bit more attention to the metrics, since I remember one question at the very beginning, kind of requesting you to list out the ways you utilize metrics to validate your MVP.
So I talked about that. I'm not sure what else to add in terms of, it has to be more specific question. So I can reiterate what I said before. And again, it's not specific question, so I don't know exactly what they mean by what specific metric, but the way to apply metric is to, first step is what most people don't do, right? That's the part I was trying to emphasize, is to build, when you build your code, when you build your product, build a way to record those interactions with your product, right, into the product. So if you're tracking a user, number of times the user, clicked on a certain button and then wanted to pick choose certain things from a menu, right, and you want to focus just on that because that's really important to you, then you have to record that interaction in your product. And the way to do that is, you can't do it after you finish the product. You have to do it before. You have to store that data somehow. So every time someone clicks on that, you have to have literally code that records the information in a log. So general concept here is to build, instead of coming after your product is already done, taking generic clicks over the page, you figure out what workflow is important. That's not something general analytics tool will easily track. So that workflow has to be built into a product and stored somewhere in logs. So you have to store the time, where user came from, maybe how long user spent on other things before they clicked on this particular feature or use a particular feature. So it has to be in the context of, so you're collecting not just that particular workflow, but other environmental, I would call them, or contextual information about that action. And only then you can actually start to analyze intelligently what you're doing. A generic like page count or number of clicks or time spent on a page, that's, to me, it's useless. It's really just like not giving you a lot of information. It sounds great when you actually have it. Somebody can say, hey, I'm generating a lot of traction, a lot of people are checking my site. It doesn't mean anything. It really doesn't. And there are many articles on that that can prove that very easily, why somebody can have high visits but low utilization. So I don't know. Again, I don't know specifics of the question in terms of metrics. I can't speak more in detail on that.
In any case, I would like to request the attendees to raise a hand or like type something in the chat if they want a verbal way to ask you a question. I think it would very much simplify the progress. If not, maybe I should give them a few minutes to just gather their thoughts in case they want to ask something.
Yeah, definitely. See if there's any more questions. And if we can, I don't know if we can, but give maybe somebody permission to speak, like maybe turn on their microphone so they can ask directly. We can have a dialogue, or maybe that might be actually helpful.
That is what I will do as soon as anyone raises a hand.
If someone has a different idea or something they wanted to suggest, that would be also a question or suggestion or comment. That would be great too. Definitely want to have more interaction.
While we wait, I would kind of want to touch upon, again, in the software industry, the use of no-code tools to generate an MVP faster. What is your opinion on using those tools?
I'm sorry, Anna. I was just reading a question here, but I'll please ask again because somebody just Omar sent the question. But I'll answer your question first, and then we'll go to Omar's. Go ahead.
Okay, so basically, your thoughts on the no-code solutions to generate an MVP for software development.
Okay, yeah, I actually have experience with no-code environments. I started a initiative with Mass Challenge to provide some of the insurance companies no-code environment for them to build solutions. There's definitely a space for that. Generally, I prefer low-code versus no-code because low-code gives you opportunity to customize better and have more control over the platform you're using. But in no-code environment, as long as it's specific to your problem, to your like industry, so that actually could be fairly quick and dirty way to build your MVP. Knowing that you have no control over extensions, as much control over extensions as you'd like, because everything you need to customize is going to depend on ability of that platform to be extensible and permissions you're going to have. So that's just keep in mind that you can test it. However, there's another problem that I believe is bigger than just building something quickly and dirty. A lot of these no-code platforms are very limited because their business model is based on addressing multiple industries. So if you actually go into like Uncork, which is a company out of New York, I know some people there. They're actually pretty popular. They just got funding last year, 200 plus mil. And so they're doing well, but what they're doing is very generic across industry, horizontal solutions. So if I want to do something very specific, it's pretty hard. If I want to do something generic, like automate my workflows or, do something like fairly simple linear operation, definitely easy. But if I want to do something specific to my industry that has, pretty interesting things, but not very common in other industries, I have to customize. And that customization is a hurdle because now I have to talk to them and they would have to customize it for me. And or build my own extension on top of it. So it's going to be clunky. So that's what I'm saying about having something out of, but certainly for quick and dirty initial ones, I would definitely use it. So Omar asked, how do you integrate MVP into organizations with firm strategic direction? Well, it's not orthogonal to having a firm strategic direction. As a matter of fact, every organization probably, good ones have a very firm strategic direction. And the question is how along that direction, can you find a way to test that hypothesis? Apple has a strong strategic direction, but they constantly innovate. Facebook has strong strategy. They all have strong strategy, but they constantly come up with new ideas and they put them out there to test. So it's not, different. It doesn't mean you're going to change strategy by putting a new MVP out there. You can have an MVP to test the problem within existing strategy. I mean, again, it's a general question. I'm curious what really is behind the question. Maybe there was an idea that somebody suggested in the company that's a little bit outside of their, strategy, and that might be a little clashing with the internal ways of working things. I'm guessing that's more of what it is. But no company will say no to something that solves a customer problem. So if you can show that you found a problem and you'd like to solve it, doing this approach, which is really very cost efficient and very resource efficient problem and effective, it's proven effective, then I believe you're going to win that. Every company that I work with, I have a company also who builds software for other companies. We start with small chunks of solutions at the beginning, and then as we prove that that solution works well, we iterate on it. We continue to build more on top of that. Salman Petkovic, he's actually my mentee. That's great. How to narrow down a group that includes many other people in order to implement a software solution?
I'm sorry, I just unmuted Omar in case he wanted to clarify his question.
If I may elaborate, but basically the reason why the question comes from, is that in a normal work where you have very firm strategic direction, where you can end up with new ideas, which are still useful on a kind of lower level or engineering level, but are very difficult to communicate to the upper level or to decision makers if it's a large organization. And it's you end up having lots of underground projects until you have really tangible results. And would your solution basically be to continue with that kind of underground development rather than try to strike the deals head on in the beginning? You basically end up having demonstrator without a really serious demonstrator with really tangible results. It's very difficult to convince the decision makers to move in direction that you have discovered.
So let me ask you this. Let's assume you're working on this problem, or somebody you know. Are you very clear on what problem you're trying to solve?
Yes, generally speaking, yes.
Okay, and that problem...
this doesn't happen only once. This happens regularly, because if you work in a slightly more conservative or traditional industry, then it occurs on a regular basis.
Okay, so I'm imagining that people, that if you know about the problem, then management should know about the problem too. Or maybe in your case, is it a case that they are not aware of the problem the customer is facing, and that you are, maybe because you're working more on the ground and you see customer feedback on a daily basis? That is typical in a lot of industries where management is not so hands-on and doesn't see, obviously, day-to-day operations. Is that the case?
That is the case, and there's a specific reason why that is the case. And this is not just the company I work for. I think this is across industry, is that simply the digitalization is changing the environment, while the management comes from, education that's maybe 30, 40 years old, because, the gray hairs were the reason why they got into the positions they are in. So simply through the time, the situation have changed, but they are not following the technical developments. The technical knowledge is still, let's say, 20 years old, but the management knowledge is current.
Okay.
And this is across industry. I can tell you the industry, it's automotive, which is very kind of conservative and traditional, and it's not easy to basically steer it. It's like steering a really big ship.
Yeah. Well, that's why Tesla is worth more than 12 companies combined.
Exactly.
That's the punishment they get at the end. But to answer the specific question, your best bet here, and I work with some companies that are in Fortune 500, and some of them are considered old businesses, traditional businesses, not old, but traditional. They, as long as you have the formulation of that problem, you don't have to go into technical solution of it, but you have to have a good formulation of that problem. It's very rare not to, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time, because you need a lot of players to agree on the same thing before things move forward. But your best bet is to start with formulating a problem and stay away from technical solution to the problem at this point. Because, my company builds technical solutions, and we sometimes have to convince our own clients that certain problems are worth solving. But we don't go in there and start offering solutions. We start offering, basically, we start telling them about the problems that because we also work, as you build a solution, you're becoming aware of customers, their customers and our clients' customers and what they're facing. And we also maintain a lot of these systems and support a lot of these systems. So we definitely have knowledge of that. So we also start with a problem. We say, hey, there's a problem out there. But even the internal staff that works on technical side of things is aware of the problems. And I know sometimes that those lines of communications are pretty broken, and they're in silos. So I certainly understand where you're coming from. I've been in those situations. The only good way I saw solution to that is by presenting a problem. Because there's never it's very hard not to find a solution, technical solution to a problem, because you can, like you said, digital transformation is happening and you can pretty much digitize anything, right? You can transform anything digitally, you can automate anything, you can convert processes digitally. So that's okay. But as long as you have to start with the problem, you have to emphasize the problem, and that is the first step. And then, you have to get their awareness of the problem before you actually start suggesting solutions. That's how we do it. So yeah, the bigger the company, the harder it is. And sometimes it's just the delay between when you suggest a problem to when they actually start to act on it. I've seen that too. I suggested a solution to a problem. I'll give you a specific example. We built a lot of products for a company to solve individual problems for individual units. So they were functionally related. So maybe it was some accounting, some warehouses, some supply management, some e-commerce, some order management, et cetera, et cetera. So we built a lot of solutions that solve those individual problems. And I, at some point, said, we're going that direction. Why don't we build a portal where people can go in, and instead of logging in different solutions, they can just go in the portal and they will choose a solution. So it's a one login, and it's also easy to share data when you have everything in the same platform, because a lot of data from different products are shared. And so it's kind of like a lot of tying ins. And I said, why don't we do that? And this is something I suggested 8 months ago, and now they're doing it. But it took 8 months for the idea to percolate. And this is somebody who trusts us with their most sensitive data. Very big company, very profitable. And so it took, and they really, they really trust us. So that took 8 months. Just think about it. And I thought that was like a simple idea, but it took 8 months to implement it. So it's going to take a long time, especially in automotive. I was talking to Volvo. Volvo is actually one of the pretty advanced companies, but even they're they're going into autonomous vehicles, and they're trying to change that, trying to compete with companies like Tesla. But gosh, you just saw the news with Volkswagen and how they failed with their software, right? They're trying to build a new car that compares Tesla EV that has software capabilities. It's very hard. And I don't believe that that's because they have bad engineers. I believe it's just the way they manage it. I think their engineers are great. I just don't think they're led in a certain way that is effective, because it shouldn't be that hard to figure out how to, load software and run software in a car and get software updates and, and run electronics in an EV car. So, but somehow, it didn't work for them. Anyway, I hope that answers a question. But go back to my first initial answer, which is started with the problem. You have to convince them that there is a problem, and the more the squeaky wheel gets the grease kind of thing. You have to convince them that there's a problem first, and then once they're once they're alerted to the problem, then you have more control over how you develop the solution. Should we read? Can I read the next question?
Yes, go for it.
Okay. So I was starting to read Selman Patko's solution. Question is how to narrow down a group that includes many elder people in order to implement a software solution for a particular problem, since elder people struggle more with using certain technologies. Okay, so let me ask you this. What's the best technology ever used? What are some of the best technologies we know? Okay, one of them is, something I use every day. iPhone. Why is iPhone such a good technology? Because even old people can use FaceTime, right? Right. That's not, well, that's an example. Why is such an easy thing to use? Because it's so intuitive. Even old people, even my grandma can use. You remember that phrase, like, make it so that even your grandma can understand, right? Or use. So how you narrow down a group that, okay, so the question is really how you get software that even elderly population can use. Well, you have to simplify and make it intuitive. Now, again, I don't know specific, maybe Salman can explain what he's trying to work on, but you have to.
Yes, I can, if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes, you can hear it.
Okay.
I can.
So the problem was actually a web application that I made with my friend, and the actual problem was to solve the time that customers wait in the restaurants to be served, because many customers just come to the restaurant and wait for at least 15 to 20 minutes to be served. And we actually tried to implement an application that would make the orders easier. So the customer would come to the restaurant and make an order in like 2 minutes. Like it takes only a few seconds. We narrowed it down as much as we could, but the main problem was that when we tried to implement the application in some of the restaurants, like they would ask us many times, like, how are older people gonna use the application? So that's why I asked this particular question.
So, okay, well, let me ask you a question. So what was it about the application that older people couldn't use?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Okay, so why, I'm assuming if I'm a person in a restaurant, they ask you because why did they assume that older people can't use the application?
Maybe because older people prefer like the traditional methods of ordering in restaurants. Like they want to take the menu, they want to speak to the staff or something like that. Maybe
Okay,
that's one of the reasons.
that's one of the reasons. Okay,
Yeah.
how many old people did you talk to? Who Did you talk to many old people about this? Did you ask them how they would use the application?
Well, I mostly talked to the staff of the restaurants, and I asked for their feedback. I haven't really, how should I say this? Like, I didn't have the chance uh, to present the application to some older people.
But
Like maybe some. I didn't have the opportunity to present it in a particular restaurant or something like that.
you're building a solution for older people. They're your customers, but you're asking restaurant owners what they think about that solution, right? So am I?
Well, because mm, they are in touch with older people as well as the younger people all the time, so they
They're
should know better maybe.
the observer. They're not actual users of technology. They're not. You're not catering to them. You're catering to old people. So what they're giving you is their feedback, their kind of assumptions about how older people would use it. So the only way so basically you build a solution, but you didn't really ask your ultimate user, which is old people, right? In restaurants, elderly people, how they would use solution, whether they like the solution or not. Because if you don't do that, then you're not asking the right customer, right? You have to ask elderly, right? You have to find some of them and ask them how they would use your solution and what they like about it, what they don't like about it. First, whether they use it and what they like and what they don't like about it. So you were not asking the right customer. That's not your restaurant owners are not your customer. Your customers are people that are using. If elderly people want to use it, you can go back to restaurant owners and say, hey, this will increase your turnover rate. It will increase your revenue because you'll have more people and less wait time and higher capacity utilization. They would definitely like that. So you come to them with a solution and say, hey, because of this, you're going to have a quicker turnover or higher turnover on your tables. So you have to be talking to your elderly people first, and then use that feedback to go back to restaurant owners who will ultimately, I mean, they're not even relevant to this particular case, unless you want to sell them a tablet that they have on the table, like here in the US. you have a tablet in some restaurants and you just basically order. Usually we use QR codes because of COVID now, it's very popular. But some restaurants have started implementing tablets where you go through and order and tablet. But even without that, just using an app, if elderly people need to use an app, there's all kinds of things that you need to take into account. Higher, a bigger font, small, bigger picture, more, less distraction on the screen, things like that, right? Just to cater to them if this is your primary demographic.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Next, do we have next question?
Not that I can see. Well done. Since there are no further questions and we are right on time, taking into account the small delay we had, I would like to thank you for taking the time to be here to share your knowledge with us in front of both the audience and the foundation. This was a very informative session.
Thanks everybody. Thank you, Anna, for a great webinar. Thanks everybody who was listening. Yeah, great. We should do it again.
Well done. Have a great evening.